first of all, thanks to join us in WTM 18. It's a pleasure to receive you both to talk about the world and not only about Brazil. And we would like to talk about electrification, the electrical vehicles. In Brazil, this product is starting now. We have a lot of good initiatives, but it's not comparable like you have in Europe, like you have in the United States, and also we have in China. For example, just to give some numbers for you, we have, and correct me if I'm wrong, we have around more than 3 million electrical vehicles in the world. Norway, it's the best in class on the volume, if I'm right.
In ratios, not in volume.
Okay. Yeah. So I would like
it's a small country.
Okay, that's okay. And I would like to understand from your point of view to explain to us why this volume we are reaching in Europe and also afterwards in California. Give us some explanation what's happening, please.
So you want me to start with Norway?
Yeah.
Okay. So Norway is an interesting example because 39% of the registration are electrical vehicle, and there is an easy reason for that. Twofold. The first one is tax-wise, and the second one is service-wise. On the tax side, the Norwegian government has eliminated the registration tax, which is very high in Norway, representing 50% of the acquisition price of a car. So that has been removed. There is no VAT, and VAT is at 25% in Norway. Okay. Then there is a reduced tax road. And for company car, the corporate tax we apply has been also reduced. This is on the tax side. And on the service side, you are allowed to drive an electrical car in the bus line. You can get access to free parking and free tolls. And then there are more charging stations than anywhere in Europe, with 7,700 charging stations. And the government itself is also buying electrical cars. So when you put all those things together, you get a good deal for electrical car. Whether or not you can do that all over the world is another question, because Norway is a wealthy country, and most of European countries are struggling with the budget, so they are not probably able to replicate the Norwegian example. But the good news is that over time, but this is for later, the cost of electric car will reduce and they will probably become competitive in the near future.
Good. So infrastructure is important. The government it's also important to speed this process. And in the United States, what we have as a good examples.
All right, so you did mention that we have about 3.1 million electric vehicles on the road worldwide. Yeah. More than 40% of those are in China, but over 700,000 of those are in the United States. And here I am, I'm a Canadian speaking about the United States, but that's all right. And then when we come to Brazil, we're what, 4,000 electric vehicles?
We have, the numbers are around 10,000 vehicles.
Okay.
This year until May, around 1,800 new vehicles.
Purchased in 2018.
Yeah, it's too small for the size of our fleet.
Okay, so California is often held up as an example, and it's often used as an example of how tax incentives or rebates on purchase price work when it comes to the electric vehicle equation. However, it might surprise some people to know that California is not the most incentivized state. In fact, it's number 6, and it falls behind states like Texas, Louisiana, Maryland, and Colorado, states that we don't expect, to have that kind of attention to tax incentives and rebates for electric vehicles. So the secret with California is that it's a lot more than just the tax rebates. So some of the things that we've already heard about Norway, the ability to use high-density traffic lanes, the ability to charge your vehicles at work for free. Those are other types of incentives that are starting to mean a lot more to people than simple cash. And the bottom line, too, is that the more electric vehicles are purchased and used, the greater becomes the comfort level of the average citizen to go out and buy one and to use one. And so in countries like Norway and in the state of California, that's in fact what we've achieved, is a high level of comfort in taking the EV step.
Nice, important. I think we as Brazil have a lot of to do, but I think we are doing some homework, good homework. There are some initiatives in São José dos Campos, is a city close of São Paulo. The government start to put electrical vehicles in the street, so I think we are moving not so fast, but it's the future, I hope so, because we need to have a better world without pollution, without CO2 emission. But we know the big issue, and for Brazil, I know that's quite strong, is the infrastructure to provide the charge and so on. We have a number of 430,000 charger bases in the world. It looks like a lot, but it's not. And I know that in Europe and the United States, the system is a little bit, can be a little bit different. And Kate, how it works, the infrastructure in United States, what we can learn from you.
Sure. Brazil's a big country.
Yeah.
The United States is a big country. Yeah. Canada is a huge country. So, of course, the infrastructure is a challenge. In the United States, public infrastructure at a level 2 or higher, numbers at around, let me check my note here, 22,000. That's only 1/7 of the traditional fuel stations available in the United States, so obviously, clearly not enough. So in the US, there's what I will call a patchwork of EV charging solutions. So there are the networks that are provided by the OEMs or the car manufacturers. So Tesla, for example, they have about 1,350 stations, supercharged stations worldwide, of which almost 600 are in the US. So that gives them a huge competitive advantage, because right now only Tesla owners can use those supercharged stations. That may change in the future. Other car manufacturers are going down that road. So you've got the government infrastructure, you've got the manufacturer infrastructure, and then you have a whole bunch of third parties coming into the real gap or hole in the charger market. And just to electrify America, they're putting over 100 charging stations into Walmarts across the United States. And ChargePoint, they have the plan, they have 53,000 stations today. The plan to have 2.5 million by 2025. And when I say the number 2025, that sounds like it's way off in the future, but it's not. It's now. It's tomorrow. So imagine that, 2.5 million charging stations. That's a huge number. And I want to talk about a specific project in Canada, but I think we'll go ahead and talk about Europe first, and then we'll come back to the Sun Country one that we talked about.
I think there is one thing I need to mention about Europe before going into infrastructure, and it's regulation, because everybody knows that Europe is very much regulated, and there is one regulation which will make impossible for the manufacturers not to go electric. By 2021, the average emission per car sold in Europe needs to be 95 grams, and today it's 112 grams. If a manufacturer is not able to reach the objective which is being given by the European Community by 2021, he will have to pay 95 euro per car per gram over the 95. So in the situation of today, it means that they will have to pay 20 billion fine for the cars they are selling. There is no more profit for car manufacturers. But what's happening in Europe is that through fuel and diesel, for 10 years, the level of emission has been decreasing. And in the latest 2 years, the level of emission has increased again for two reasons. The first one is the success of SUV, which is having more emission of CO2, and the second one is a switch back from diesel into gasoline, which is producing more CO2. So all the manufacturers are now running to offer electrical vehicle, and if they don't achieve a market share of somewhere between 25 and 30%, which looks impossible, they will not reach the objective and they will have financial problems. And the other element which is also pushing for electricity is a change in what you call WTPL, which is the way you evaluate the CO2 emission. The way they were doing that in the past was a bit of a joke, and this is what we call the Dieselgate and the Volkswagen Gate. And things that happen, they change the rule, and the way they evaluate the CO2 emission of a car brings an existing car to 10% more emission than what it was in the past. So there is really an emergency for the manufacturers to produce electrical vehicles. So whether or not there are tax incentives, it's on the offer side that the manufacturer will have to lower cost, will have to produce different cars just to achieve and be able not to be fine. Now going to the infrastructure, I share your views, but I'm not so concerned about the lack of quick chargers outside of the big city. Personally, I do consider that we can't compare an electrical car with a gasoline car, and we will not use the electrical car in the same way we use gasoline. And for the long term, I personally believe that electrical car will be charged 95% at home or at work, at least in Europe, where distances are not the same as they are in the US. So the infrastructure is developing very slowly, and that seems to be the major obstacle. But personally, I don't believe that this is a major obstacle. I think that the major obstacle nowadays is more cost.
Taking what you are telling us and about the infrastructure, I think we are talking about electrical vehicles, but I'm forced to think about the hybrids. Maybe at this moment, without an infrastructure, the hybrid vehicles can be a very good solution because you don't have to stop to recharge. Am I wrong?
If I may, I am a great fan of plug-in hybrid for other reason, and this is linked to CO2. To produce a battery, you produce a lot of CO2, and there is a study that says that you can offset the emission of CO2 with an electrical car, a small one like a Zoe, for instance, after 50,000 miles. So when you produce a very big battery, you generate a lot of CO2 at the moment of the production. So scientists are saying, and green people are saying, that the best way forward is probably to have a plug-in hybrid where you use your car 80% of the time with the battery that you charge at night, and when you go for a long trip on the road, you will use the gasoline. And altogether, the usage of gasoline of a plug-in hybrid car will be very low. And then we may also talk about how you produce electricity to do the full balance. And most of the specialists now are considering that full electric is probably more polluting than plug-in hybrid. So personally, I believe that this is a good solution, not an interim one, but probably the final one. And this could change all the thinking about speed charging.
Good, good. Well, the other topic we can talk about the electrification is about costs. Because when you get the example in Brazil, it's really expensive to buy an electric car. We know the batteries has an important participation on the costs, but we also, for example, in Brazil, we have the chargers for free. So people cannot compare the price between electricity and gasoline or ethanol. And from your point of view, what else we can think about the costs impacts on the electrification? And I mean to recharge, the maintenance and everything. Your point of view, what we can expect about costs for electrification?
Okay, I'll make a quick comment about that. First of all, I think that most of us know that the cost of batteries has decreased significantly. And if you look at just between 2010 and 2015, the cost of batteries went down by 70%. So many analysts, in fact, the International Energy Agency says that we're going to achieve some kind of fuel parity between gas and electricity in the next 5 to 10 years. So as long as fleet managers and individuals who are concerned about the environment and are taking the EV route, as long as they're really concerned with overall total cost of ownership and not that initial acquisition cost, you know, the cost equation is going to work out very well for electric vehicles. I think that you had some precise data on the actual cost of operating the vehicle over 100 kilometers.
Yes. Well, actually, the situation is different in Europe because the cost of the fuel and the diesel is very expensive. So I made just a very quick and small example. If you take a small car, to make 100 kilometers, you will need 12 kilowatts, or you will need 7 liters of gasoline or 5 liters of diesel. At the cost in Europe at present time, it means that it will cost you €1 for an electric car, €5 for a diesel car, and €9 for fuel. When we talk about electric car, it's only if you charge your car at home, because if you are using a speed charger, this is very expensive or very cheap. You can have it for free at the supermarket, but you can pay as much of the fuel if you are going over the road. And if you want to buy a charger at home, it will cost you somewhere between €300 and €2,000, depending on the power of the charger. So electricity, from the point of view of your usage of the car, will be much cheaper in Europe, no doubt about that.
So one example that I previously mentioned that I wanted to highlight when it comes to cost is the cost to the user. So in Canada, anybody here been to Canada? Okay, excellent. So you know it's a big country. There's St. John's, Newfoundland on one side of Canada. On the other side of Canada, there's Victoria, British Columbia. There's a distance of 7,100 kilometers. So it takes you 80 hours to drive from one coast to the other. So a third party, a private entrepreneur in Canada, has undertaken to build an electric highway so that you can drive that 7,100 kilometers for free, emissions free. And he's done that without a cent of government funding. And what the funding model is that it's all done through fast charging stations at 4-hour intervals along this highway. And it's done through putting charging stations in popular hotels and popular restaurants. And so private business will install and absorb the cost of the charging stations and the electricity because of the business that it generates by being part of this highway network. That makes ownership of an electric vehicle fairly attractive. And this can be done in other places. It's not just Canada that can do this. So look up, the company is Sun Country Highways, and the entrepreneur responsible is Kent Rathwell, and he has a great story.
I just have one comment about that. I think this is very specific to Canada, because if you ask me how I will go from one point to another in Europe, which is 7,000 miles distant, I will never take my car. I will take a plane or a train, right, and I will hire a car over there, or I will hire a scooter if it's more. So I think the solution is also depending upon the territory and the social aspects.
Yeah, I think this is an example of United States, of Canada. We have recently here in Brazil, from São Paulo to Rio de Janeiro, we install some charger bases to stop the car, to recharge and keep the trip. So I think we are moving, maybe because the size of the country, maybe because the price of the flight, we are moving in this model. So I think, anyway, it's a very good example to bring the car for the commercial area and to improve the business for the gas stations and the hotels and so on. So I think this is something we can learn quite well. And we talk a lot about cost infrastructure, and we know the participation, the importance of the fleet, the company fleets, cars in the segment to create the mindset, and how it's working in your region, because are the companies pushing for electrical vehicles, or is more for private use?
Well, there is not that. Sorry.
You go ahead.
Sorry. Okay. I have one figure. 2 weeks ago, ALD has emitted a green bond to finance electrical cars, and they give a number of how many electric cars they have in their fleet, and it's just half the percentage of the electrical vehicle in Europe. So it's not a conclusion, but just to say that probably electrical vehicles are more sold to the retail than to corporate nowadays. However, most of the big corporates are keen to move into electric vehicle, but TCO and cost is what matters more. So what they are doing for the timing, with some exception, because Deutsche Post, for instance, have 16,000 electric vehicles in its fleet, and some electricity company also in Europe have great numbers of cars. What they are doing, they are just claiming for the future that they will be electric. For instance, LeasePlan has said that by 2021, all its company car will be electric. It means that from now, they are buying only electric. HP says 10% in 4 years, and so on. Most companies are just claiming, and they say that they will switch and move to electric cars.
So in the United States, lots of case studies of the use of electric vehicles by fleets. In New York City, garbage collection, and what a great use, because of course garbage collection early morning hours every day in Manhattan, and those vehicles are silent. You know, the LAPD, Los Angeles Police Department, uses their non-pursuit police fleet. They're electrifying that. The Pacific Gas and Electric has a bucket truck fleet for utilities that is electric. The Ministry of Transportation in Ontario has gone to 65% electrification of their passenger fleet. Lots of case studies. But what they say that all of these fleets have in common, so the common factors to drive a fleet towards electricity are, one is access to charging. So the infrastructure has to be there. The second one is the range. They have to have ranges under 40 kilometers or 25 miles. The next one is some kind of compelling need, either regulatory or company, to decrease emissions and decrease operating costs. The next one is some kind of purchase incentives to drive down the capital cost. And then the final one is a champion. And this is how personal and the retail market, the people that are out there right now buying the electric vehicles, those are the people that in the business context and in the fleet context, where those other criteria exist, it's that champion that's going to make sure to drive the fleets towards electrification.
Nice, very nice. Unfortunately, our time finished. I think we have a lot of topics to discuss, and we could not talk about the process to produce the batteries and the CO2 emission when you produce a battery. Because we came, we don't have time, sorry. But anyway, I think the electrification is the future. We have very good examples in the other countries, and I hope in Brazil we're gonna follow the right way. And thanks a lot, Kate, for your participation. Pascal, it's a pleasure. You are always welcome to Instituto PARAR, to WTM, and I hope to see you next year. Okay, and thank you. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you very much.